They put 196 houses on my dead father's land and told me I was the criminal. 6 months after the funeral, I drove out to his 47 acres in Texas to scatter his ashes. Instead of open fields and mesquite trees, I found paved roads, streetlights, and families moving furniture into brand new homes they'd already paid nearly $500,000 for. When I tried to stop the construction, the HOA president laughed in my face. Her lawyer told me the land was abandoned. That adverse possession made it legally theirs, that I was a nobody trying to scam hardworking families. So I did the only thing she didn't expect. I walked away. I let them finish every house. I let them pour every driveway. I let them collect every dollar in pre-sales. And then, I walked into federal court with my father's original deed from 1971. What would you do if someone stole your family's land and called you the criminal? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Garrett Hendricks. I'm 52, third-generation auto mechanic from Millbrook Springs, Texas. My grandfather bought those 47 acres back in 1971 with money he saved working oil rigs. My dad inherited it, paid taxes on it for 30 years, and left it to me when he passed 6 months ago. I should have visited sooner, should have dealt with the property right after the funeral, but grief does funny things to a man. Dad and I had our differences. He wanted me to go to college. I wanted to work with my hands. But that land? That was where he taught me to hunt, where we'd camp every summer, where 3 generations of Hendricks men learned what it meant to be Texan. The drive out there felt like visiting a grave. Spring morning, windows down, that familiar smell of mesquite and cattle in the air. I had Dad's ashes in an old coffee can on the passenger seat. He would have laughed at that. Always said fancy urns were for city folk. But when I turned down what should have been the dirt road to our property, I hit asphalt, fresh blacktop, street signs reading Willowbrook Drive and Heritage Lane. My stomach dropped faster than a rock down a well. I kept driving, thinking maybe I'd taken a wrong turn. But there was our old gate, Dad's gate, now painted white with a fancy sign. Willowbrook Estates, where dreams take root. The irony would have killed him if he wasn't already dead. What I found next still makes my blood boil. 196 houses. Not just framed, finished. Families unloading U-Hauls, kids riding bikes on sidewalks that covered the spot where Dad taught me to drive stick. Soccer moms in SUVs that cost more than I make in 2 years. And right there, in what used to be our favorite camping spot, sat a sales office. Fancy trailer with vinyl siding and a woman inside who looked like she'd stepped out of a real estate magazine. Perfect blonde hair, designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was showing floor plans to a young couple holding a baby. I walked in, still carrying that coffee can, still planning to scatter Dad's ashes under his favorite oak tree. The woman, her nameplate read Veronica Blackwell, HOA president, didn't even look up from her tablet. "Sir, this is a private sales appointment. If you're interested in purchasing, I can schedule you for later this week." I set the coffee can down real gentle on her desk. The sound of it, that metallic clink, made her finally look at me. "Ma'am, I think there's been some mistake. This is my family's land," she laughed. Actually laughed, like I'd told her the funniest joke she'd heard all week. "Mr. She waited for my name like she was doing me a favor. "Hendricks, Garrett Hendricks." "Mr. Hendricks, I can assure you there's no mistake. Blackwell Development has owned this property for 18 months. We have all the proper documentation." Yeah, she pulled out a thick folder, started flipping through legal papers. "Perhaps you're thinking of a different property." The taste of copper filled my mouth. That's what rage tastes like, in case you're wondering. "Ma'am, my family has owned this land for over 50 years. My father never sold it to anybody." That's when her lawyer showed up. Slick-looking guy in a $1,000 suit, the kind of man who'd sell his mother's wheelchair if the price was right. "Is there a problem, Ms. Blackwell? This gentleman seems confused about property ownership. Perhaps you could explain adverse possession to him?" The lawyer smiled like a snake eyeing a mouse. "Mr. Hendricks, Texas law is very clear. When property is abandoned for the statutory period, 10 years, and someone else takes open, notorious possession while paying taxes, ownership legally transfers. Your father, was it? He abandoned this land. We followed every legal requirement." They had documents, thick stacks of them, tax liens, abandonment notices, official-looking stamps and seals. And there I stood in my work clothes, holding a coffee can full of ashes, looking like exactly what they said I was. Nobody. That's when I made the smartest decision of my life. I picked up that coffee can, looked Veronica Blackwell right in her cold blue eyes and said, "Well, I guess you folks know more about the law than I do." I walked out, got in my truck, drove home. But I didn't give up. See, what these city sharks didn't know about small-town mechanics is this. We know how to fix things that are broken. And brother, this situation was broken as a busted transmission. 3 days later, a certified letter showed up at my shop. The envelope felt thick as a brick, and when I opened it, the legal letterhead practically screamed money and threats. Cease and desist from Veronica Blackwell's attorney demanding I stop harassing residents and making false ownership claims that damage property values. Harassing residents? I hadn't talked to anyone but her. The letter went nuclear. Apparently I was now a disturbed individual attempting to perpetrate fraud against innocent families. They were filing for a restraining order to keep me away from their property, continue my campaign of harassment, and they'd sue me for defamation, emotional distress, and probably the cost of their fancy lawyer's lunch. I sat in my office, and I use that term loosely since it's basically a corner of the garage where I keep a desk that's held together by prayers and electrical tape, reading this legal threat while the smell of motor oil and fresh coffee fought for dominance in the air. That's when I called Buck Morrison. Buck's been my go-to lawyer since he came back from Iraq and hung up his shingle in town. Ex-Marine who drives a beat-up Ford instead of a BMW, which tells you everything about his priorities. "Garrett," he said after I read him the letter, "they're counting on you being intimidated. But here's something I learned from a Houston case. Adverse possession isn't magic. They need complete abandonment for 10 straight years, miss even one tax payment during that period, and their case collapses." The bitter taste of injustice filled my mouth as I thought about Dad, how he'd drive out there monthly, checking fence lines, clearing brush, never missed a tax payment in 30 years. Buck, Dad was religious about those bills, said the government might waste his money, but they'd get it on time. Then let's prove it. The courthouse smells like floor wax, old paper, and bureaucratic despair. County Clerk Dolores Martinez has been there longer than some buildings have been standing. "Garrett Hendricks," she said when we walked in. "Sorry about your daddy. Never missed a tax payment in 30 years. Always paid cash, didn't trust computers." Buck leaned forward. "Dolores, we need every tax record for the Hendricks property." What happened next made my blood pressure spike. According to her computer, Dad had missed payments for 18 months, January 2019 through June 2020. But Dolores frowned like she'd tasted sour milk. "That can't be right. I remember him coming in during that period, always joked about government spending." She disappeared into archives, returned with a cardboard box older than Moses, started digging through handwritten receipts, Dad's cash payments with official stamps for every month during that supposed gap. "Someone deleted these computer records," Buck said, voice sharp as a blade, "but they forgot about paper trails. Someone had corrupted county government to steal Dad's land. This wasn't adverse possession. This was fraud." Buck filed an emergency injunction that morning. We had receipts, testimony, and Dad's ironclad will. That afternoon, Veronica arrived for full-scale intimidation. 2 men in $1,000 suits who looked like professional leg breakers, plus a reputation management consultant, fancy talk for problem eliminator. "Mr. Hendricks," Veronica said, stepping around oil stains like they carried plague, "you're destroying 196 families' dreams. These people trusted our legal ownership." She spread professional photographs like dealing cards. Kids on swings, elderly couples on porches, young mothers with strollers. "We're offering $100,000 for quiet resolution," the consultant said. "More than abandoned land was worth." I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out my ace. A photograph of Dad in work clothes, hammer raised, fixing lightning damage. Digital timestamp, exactly 2 weeks before his heart attack. "Hard to claim abandonment when the owner was maintaining it until he died," I said, watching Veronica's composure crack like cheap paint. She snatched the photo, hands actually shaking. "This doesn't prove anything substantial. Maybe not alone, but with 30 years of tax receipts somebody tried to erase, any jury's going to question your story." They left faster than teenagers caught drinking behind church. But 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Buck's voice was grim. "Garrett, they just filed a motion claiming you forged that photograph. They're saying the timestamp was digitally altered and demanding a federal investigation into document fraud." The taste of copper filled my mouth. Veronica had just made her first real mistake. She'd escalated this into federal territory where her local connections couldn't protect her. "Buck, can they prove forgery?" "Not when we have the camera's memory card with the original file. But more importantly, federal jurisdiction means federal resources. They just opened a door they can't close." That night, sitting on my porch with the sound of crickets filling the darkness, I realized something. Veronica thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She had no idea I was about to flip the entire board. That federal investigation threat turned out to be the best thing Veronica could have done for my case. Within 48 hours, FBI agent Patricia Vance was sitting in my garage, examining the original camera memory card with equipment that probably cost more than my annual income. The smell of her coffee mixed with motor oil created an oddly comforting aroma while she worked. "Mr. Hendricks," she said, looking up from her laptop, "this photograph is completely authentic. But more interesting is what we found in the metadata. Turns out, Dad's old digital camera had GPS tracking. The photo wasn't just proof he was maintaining the land, it pinpointed the exact location where he was working, with coordinates that matched the original 1971 survey down to the foot. But Agent Vance wasn't finished. We also discovered something else. The federal wire fraud charges Ms. Blackwell threatened you with? Those work both ways. Interstate document forgery is a federal crime. I remembered reading about a case in Montana where developers had used fake environmental reports to steal ranch land. Once federal agencies get involved, they don't just investigate the immediate crime, they dig into everything. "What exactly are you looking for?" I asked. "Patterns. This kind of systematic fraud usually isn't a one-time thing." While Agent Vance was building her case, Veronica was building her media campaign. The local TV station ran a sob story featuring 3 families from Willowbrook Estates. Young parents holding babies, elderly couples who'd invested retirement savings, a disabled veteran who'd used his VA loan for his dream home. The reporter painted me as a heartless opportunist trying to destroy an entire community over a frivolous property dispute. They interviewed neighbors who'd never met me but somehow knew I was mentally unstable and dangerous to children. The piece ended with Veronica standing in front of the development's community center, looking every inch the concerned leader. "We're dealing with a disturbed individual who refuses to accept that his father legally sold this property years ago. Our legal ownership is rock solid." That last part made me laugh out loud in my garage. Rock solid legal ownership that required deleting county tax records. But the media blitz worked. Customers started canceling appointments. Someone spray-painted "land thief" on my garage door. The coffee shop where I'd eaten breakfast for 15 years suddenly had a 20-minute wait whenever I walked in. Buck called with worse news. "They're not just fighting us in court anymore, Garrett. They've hired Pinnacle Strategies, the crisis management firm that handled that oil spill in Louisiana. These people specialize in destroying opponents through public pressure." The taste of bile filled my mouth. What's that mean for us? It means they're going to make your life hell while their lawyers drag this case out for years. Hope you can't afford to keep fighting. That's when I made a decision that probably saved my sanity. Instead of hiding from the media storm, I'd use it. I called Agent Vance. "How long until you finish investigating Blackwell Development's other properties?" "We've identified 7 similar cases across 4 states. All elderly landowners, all mysterious disappearances of tax records, all properties sitting on valuable mineral deposits or development sites. But building a federal case takes time." "How much time?" 6 months minimum, maybe longer." I hung up and stared at the calendar on my garage wall. 6 months of this harassment, 6 months of watching innocent families stress about losing their homes, 6 months of Veronica Blackwell controlling the narrative, unless I changed the game entirely. That evening I drove out to Dad's grave. The headstone looked smaller somehow, surrounded by all the chaos his death had created. I sat on the dry grass, watching the sunset paint the sky the color of rust and regret. "Dad, I know what you'd say. That good things come to those who wait, that truth always wins in the end. But these people are destroying innocent families while we wait for justice. The wind through the mesquite trees carried the sound of children laughing from Willowbrook Estates, kids who had no idea their playground was built on stolen land, whose parents worked double shifts to afford mortgage payments that funded a criminal enterprise. I made another promise to Dad that night. I wouldn't just get our land back, I'd make sure every family got justice too, even if it meant giving up the mineral rights that could make me wealthy. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this corruption went, and I had a feeling Veronica's media campaign had just given me the opening I needed to find out. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a phone call at 2 a.m. from someone who wouldn't give their name. "You're the mechanic fighting Blackwell Development?" The voice was elderly, shaky, but determined. "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" "Name's Harold Campbell. They stole my brother's ranch in Oklahoma 3 years ago. Same playbook. Deleted tax records, claimed abandonment. Elderly owner dies mysteriously right after losing his land." The hair on my neck stood up like I'd grabbed a live wire. "Your brother died?" "Heart attack, supposedly, but he was healthy as a horse until they started pressuring him. Found insulin in his blood, and David wasn't diabetic." I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "Mr. Campbell, would you be willing to talk to the FBI?" "Been trying to for 3 years. Local sheriff said it was natural causes, case closed. But that agent you got interested? She called me yesterday." Agent Vance was building something bigger than I'd imagined. Over the next week, she shared what her investigation had uncovered. 7 properties, 7 elderly owners, 7 suspicious deaths within months of losing their land. The pattern was always the same. Blackwell Development would identify valuable rural property owned by elderly people living alone. They'd corrupt local officials to delete tax payment records, file adverse possession claims, then pressure the owners to sell or face legal destruction. If the owners refused to give up, they died. Heart attacks, strokes, accidents, always natural seeming, always just convenient enough to raise suspicions. The medical examiner in Oklahoma found synthetic insulin in 3 victims' blood, Agent Vance explained during one of our morning meetings. But local law enforcement ruled them natural causes every time. I remembered something Buck had mentioned about federal jurisdiction. When crimes cross state lines, local corruption can't protect the perpetrators. And once federal agencies start investigating, they have resources that small-town sheriff's departments can't match. "What's our next move?" I asked. "We're exhuming your father." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. "What?" "If this pattern holds, your father was likely poisoned. Synthetic insulin leaves traces in bone marrow for years after death." That afternoon, I stood in the cemetery while federal technicians carefully exhumed Dad's casket. The smell of disturbed earth filled my nostrils, mixed with the sweet scent of the flowers people had left on nearby graves. Watching them load his remains into a federal transport van felt like losing him all over again. But if it proved he was murdered, it would mean justice not just for us, but for all the other families Blackwell had destroyed. While we waited for lab results, Veronica escalated her public relations war. She organized a Save Willowbrook rally featuring 196 families holding signs reading, "Protect our children," and "Stop the land grab." The local newspaper ran daily editorials about property rights and the sanctity of homeownership. Talk radio hosts ranted about government overreach and frivolous lawsuits destroying working families' dreams. But Veronica made a critical mistake. She got greedy. Instead of staying quiet while federal agents investigated, she tried to expand operations. Buck discovered she'd filed adverse possession claims on 2 more properties, an 89-year-old widow's farm and a disabled veteran's homestead. "She can't help herself," Buck said over coffee at the diner. "Success makes some people stupid." Agent Vance was delighted. Fresh crimes under active federal surveillance. She just handed us enough evidence to guarantee RICO charges. RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. I'd heard about it on crime shows, but Agent Vance explained how it applied to our situation. When someone commits multiple related crimes as part of an ongoing criminal enterprise, federal prosecutors can charge them for the entire operation, not just individual offenses. 2 adverse possession frauds within 10 years, combined with evidence of systematic corruption and possible murder, meets every requirement for RICO prosecution, she explained. "We're not just talking about property fraud anymore. We're looking at life sentences." The toxicology results came back on a Thursday morning that changed everything. Dad had been murdered. synthetic insulin in concentrations that would kill a healthy man within hours, administered sometime during the evening of his death, probably through a drink or food that masked the bitter taste. I sat in my garage, holding the medical examiner's report, feeling rage and grief and vindication all at once. The smell of motor oil and coffee couldn't mask the metallic taste of justice finally within reach. But Agent Vance had more news. We've connected your father's murder to the other deaths. Same insulin compound, same administration method, same timeline of pressure followed by sudden death. 7 families, 7 murders. Also, Veronica Blackwell could steal land worth millions. That evening, I called Harold Campbell back. Mr. Campbell, we got him. We got them all. His voice broke when I told him about the toxicology results. David always said if anything happened to him, it wasn't natural. Thank God someone finally listened. But our victory came with a terrible realization. While we'd been fighting legal battles and media campaigns, 196 innocent families had been living on land purchased with blood money. Children had been playing in yards where murder had been planned. Elderly couples had invested life savings in homes built on graves. The truth would devastate them. But the truth was all we had left. The federal courthouse in Dallas feels different from our small-town courthouse back home. Bigger, colder, with the kind of marble and brass that reminds you justice doesn't come cheap. Judge Martha Rodriguez had seen it all during 20 years on the federal bench, but even she looked stunned when Agent Vance laid out the evidence. Your Honor, what began as a property dispute has revealed a 15-year criminal enterprise spanning 4 states, 7 murders, $127 million in stolen property, and systematic corruption of local government officials. The evidence filled 3 bankers' boxes. Toxicology reports proving 7 murders by insulin poisoning. Financial records showing offshore accounts containing $47 million in criminal proceeds. Digital forensics proving systematic deletion of tax records across multiple counties. But the biggest revelation was what lay beneath all that stolen land. The United States Geological Survey has confirmed significant natural gas deposits under every property targeted by this criminal enterprise, Agent Vance continued. Conservative estimates place the total value at $340 million over 20 years. Suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't about building houses or even stealing land. It was about energy extraction rights worth more than most cities' annual budgets. Veronica and her co-conspirators had been using murder to acquire drilling rights that would make them wealthy beyond imagination. The housing developments were just cover stories, ways to generate immediate cash flow while they positioned for long-term energy profits. Judge Rodriguez studied the geological surveys with the intensity of someone reading a death warrant. Agent Vance, you're telling me that 7 people were murdered for mineral rights? Yes, Your Honor. The defendants identified elderly property owners sitting on valuable gas deposits, then systematically murdered them to acquire extraction rights through fraudulent adverse possession claims. I sat in the gallery, watching Veronica hear these charges for the first time. Her face had gone pale as courthouse marble, but her eyes still held that calculating look I'd seen in my garage months ago. Her attorney, a different one now, since her previous lawyers had apparently developed sudden ethical concerns about representing accused murderers, stood to address the court. Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence of all charges. The adverse possession claims were filed in good faith based on apparent abandonment of rural properties. Judge Rodriguez's expression could have frozen molten steel. Counselor, are you seriously arguing that 7 identical murders spanning 15 years were coincidental to your client's property acquisitions? We dispute the characterization of these deaths as murders, Your Honor. Then you'll have your opportunity to present that defense at trial. But given the scope of this alleged criminal enterprise, I'm ordering immediate asset forfeiture of all properties acquired through the defendant's activities. Those words hit the courtroom like thunder. Immediate asset forfeiture meant that every house in Willowbrook Estates would be seized by federal marshals as criminal proceeds. 196 families were about to lose their homes. I'd known this moment was coming, had been dreading it for months. These weren't criminals. They were teachers and nurses and veterans who'd trusted the wrong developer with their life savings. But Agent Vance had prepared for this too. Your Honor, the Federal Victim Restitution Fund has been structured to ensure full compensation for innocent purchasers. The mineral rights value alone exceeds the total cost of reimbursing every affected family. Judge Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Mr. Hendricks, as the rightful property owner, you'll have final say over the restitution structure. How do you wish to proceed? I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 196 families' futures on my shoulders. The courtroom was silent except for the whisper of air conditioning and my own heartbeat. Your Honor, I want every family made whole. Full refund of purchase prices, plus moving expenses, plus compensation for the trauma they've endured. Nobody should suffer because they trusted criminals. A murmur of surprise rippled through the gallery. Veronica's face showed the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her. Shock that someone would choose justice over profit. Furthermore, I continued, I'd like to dedicate half the mineral rights income to preventing elder fraud. If we can stop even one more family from going through what mine did, Dad's death will have meaning. Judge Rodriguez smiled for the first time during the proceedings. Mr. Hendricks, that's exactly the kind of justice this court likes to see. Agent Vance, please coordinate with Victim Services to implement Mr. Hendricks' restitution plan. As we left the courthouse, Agent Vance pulled me aside. Garrett, you realize you just gave up about $170 million in mineral rights income? I thought about Dad, about Harold Campbell's brother David, about 5 other elderly people who died for refusing to surrender their family land. Agent Vance, you can't put a price on doing the right thing. Besides, I've got something worth more than money now. What's that? The truth, and the chance to make sure this never happens to another family. That night, I called Harold Campbell to tell him federal marshals had arrested his brother's killers. For the first time in 3 years, the old man cried tears of joy instead of grief. The logistics of justice turned out to be more complicated than the crime itself. Agent Vance's task force had grown into a small army. FBI financial crime specialists traced every dollar through 47 shell companies scattered across 12 countries. Digital forensics experts recovered deleted files from county computers using techniques that sounded like science fiction. We've identified $127 million in recoverable assets, Agent Vance explained during one of our morning strategy sessions. Offshore accounts, real estate holdings, luxury vehicles, even a yacht registered in the Cayman Islands. But money was only part of the puzzle. We had 196 families facing immediate displacement when federal marshals seized their homes. Kids who'd lose their friends and schools, elderly couples who'd invested retirement savings in what they thought were legitimate purchases. The Victim Services Coordinator, Sarah Martinez, had experience with large-scale fraud cases. Mr. Hendricks, we're recommending a phased approach. Temporary housing allowances while we process restitution claims, then full compensation packages that include moving expenses and trauma counseling. The math was staggering. Full restitution would cost approximately $98 million, nearly every dollar the criminal enterprise had stolen over 15 years. But the mineral rights were projected to generate $2.3 million annually for decades. Buck helped me understand something crucial about federal asset forfeiture laws. When criminals use stolen money to purchase property or investments, those assets belong to the victims, not the criminals. Every house in Willowbrook, every offshore bank account, every luxury car Veronica had bought, it all reverted to the people she'd stolen from. It's like turning the crime inside out, Buck explained. Instead of victims losing money to criminals, the criminals lose everything to victims. Meanwhile, the scope of corruption was expanding daily. 3 county commissioners had been arrested for accepting bribes to approve fraudulent adverse possession claims. The county clerk who'd deleted tax records was cooperating with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Sheriff Mike Watson, Dad's old army buddy, turned out to be clean, but he was furious about being kept in the dark. Garrett, if I'd known about the federal investigation, I could have protected you from some of that harassment. Mike, Agent Vance needed operational security. Too many people in county government were compromised. The media strategy required delicate handling. Sarah organized community meetings to explain the restitution process, while federal prosecutors prepared for the inevitable avalanche of national coverage. This story has everything, the FBI's public information officer warned me. Murder, corruption, innocent families, massive fraud. Every news outlet in America is going to want interviews. I'd learned something about media manipulation from watching Veronica's campaign against me. The truth doesn't always speak for itself. Sometimes it needs a good storyteller. I'll do interviews, but only if they agree to focus on preventing elder fraud. This isn't about me getting revenge. It's about protecting vulnerable people from predators. The technical challenges were mind-boggling. Federal marshals needed to coordinate simultaneous seizures of properties in 4 states while ensuring families had temporary housing. The Justice Department's Asset Forfeiture Division had to trace ownership through layers of shell companies designed to hide criminal proceeds. Agent Vance showed me something that made the whole scope clear, a chart showing every connected crime over 15 years. Lines connected murders to property thefts to shell companies to offshore accounts. It looked like a spider web with Veronica Blackwell at the center. She wasn't just stealing land, Agent Vance said. She was operating a systematic murder-for-profit enterprise. The energy rights were worth so much that killing elderly property owners became a business model. The psychological toll was harder to quantify. Sarah arranged counseling services for affected families, but how do you process the knowledge that your dream home was built on murder? That your children's playground sits on land stolen from the dead? I met with representatives from all 196 families, teachers and nurses, veterans and retirees, young couples with babies and elderly couples celebrating golden anniversaries. All united by the terrible fact that they'd been unknowingly victimized by the same criminals who'd murdered my father. Mrs. Patterson, a 78-year-old retired librarian, spoke for many of them. Mr. Hendricks, we know this isn't your fault. We know you're trying to make things right, but our whole world has been turned upside down. That's when I made the decision that would define everything going forward. Mrs. Patterson, I want to rebuild Willowbrook as a legitimate community. Same houses, same neighbors, same schools, but this time built on honest ownership. Anyone who wants to stay can buy their home at cost using the restitution funds. The room went completely silent. Then Harold Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's husband, started clapping. Soon, the entire community center erupted in applause. We weren't just seeking justice anymore. We were rebuilding lives. Veronica's desperation revealed itself in ways I never could have imagined. While sitting in federal detention awaiting trial, she somehow managed to orchestrate a final, vicious campaign against me and the families of Willowbrook. The smell of fear and desperation seemed to permeate every move she made from behind bars. Her remaining associates launched what Agent Vance called scorched earth tactics. Anonymous tips flooded local media claiming I was mentally unstable, that the federal investigation was a conspiracy, that the toxicology evidence had been fabricated. Someone, we never proved who, started a whisper campaign suggesting the displaced families were actually complicit in the fraud. Suddenly, teachers were being questioned by school administrators, nurses were facing workplace harassment, veterans were having their benefits reviewed. They're trying to turn the victims against each other, Sarah Martinez explained during an emergency community meeting. Classic divide-and-conquer strategy. But Veronica's biggest mistake was targeting the wrong family. The Kowalskis had been early buyers in Willowbrook. Randy, a police detective, and his wife Linda, a pediatric nurse. Their 8-year-old daughter Emma had made friends throughout the neighborhood, and they'd become informal community leaders during the crisis. Someone broke into their temporary apartment while they were at work, ransacking the place and spray-painting "Fraud Family" on their daughter's bedroom wall. Nothing was stolen, but the message was clear. Cooperate with federal investigators, and your family pays the price. Randy called me that evening, his voice shaking with rage. "Garrett, Emma's afraid to sleep in her own room. She keeps asking why someone hates us." That's when I realized Veronica had made a tactical error that would destroy her. Randy wasn't just a cop. He was a detective who specialized in organized crime. And he'd just been personally targeted by the criminal enterprise he was helping to investigate. "Randy, what do you need from me?" "Permission to tear this organization apart from the inside. I've got 20 years of experience with criminal networks, and these people just made it personal." Randy's investigation uncovered connections we'd missed. The private security company that had been intimidating witnesses, owned by Veronica's brother Marcus, through a shell corporation. The crisis management firm spreading disinformation, funded through the same offshore accounts used to launder murder proceeds. More importantly, Randy discovered that Veronica was still giving orders from federal detention. Phone calls to her brother, coded messages passed through her attorney, even instructions smuggled out during family visits. "She's violating federal detention conditions," Randy explained. "Every unauthorized communication is another federal charge." Agent Vance was thrilled. We can add obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and conspiracy charges. Each violation carries 5 to 10 years. But Veronica's most desperate gambit was yet to come. Her brother Marcus arrived from Houston with a convoy of expensive cars and even more expensive lawyers. The word around town was that he'd brought $50 million in cash to resolve the situation quietly. Marcus Blackwell looked like a slicker version of his sister. Same cold eyes, same predatory confidence, but with the kind of oil money that makes people think they're untouchable. He rented the entire top floor of our nicest hotel and started holding court like some kind of corporate warlord. The smell of expensive cologne and corruption seemed to follow him everywhere. Buck got a call within hours of Marcus's arrival. "Mr. Morrison, my client would like to discuss a comprehensive settlement that benefits everyone involved." "Buck," I said when he told me about the meeting request, "what kind of settlement could possibly benefit everyone?" "The kind that involves large suitcases full of cash and federal charges mysteriously disappearing." Marcus's offer was breathtakingly audacious. $200 million split among all affected parties in exchange for dropping federal charges and accepting a civil settlement. Every family would receive more than their homes were worth. I'd get mineral rights worth tens of millions, and the whole criminal investigation would quietly disappear. "Mr. Hendricks," Marcus said during our one and only meeting, "my sister made mistakes, but destroying 196 families over property disputes seems excessive. Let's find a solution that helps everyone move forward." The conference room at Buck's office felt thick with tension and the lingering scent of Marcus's expensive cigar. His lawyers, 3 of them, all in suits that cost more than most people's cars, spread contracts across the table like they were dealing cards in a high-stakes poker game. "This is blood money," I told him. "Your sister murdered 7 people, including my father." "Alleged murders, Mr. Hendricks. The federal case relies heavily on circumstantial evidence and toxicology results that could be challenged in court." That's when I understood something crucial. Marcus wasn't just trying to buy his sister's freedom. He was afraid the investigation would expose his own involvement in the energy extraction scheme. "Agent Vance," I said after Marcus and his lawyers left, "how much of the mineral rights operation did the brother control?" According to financial records, Marcus Blackwell's energy company was the primary beneficiary of every fraudulent land acquisition. We estimate he profited $89 million from his sister's murder spree. The taste of justice was getting sweeter by the day. Veronica hadn't just been stealing land. She'd been running a murder-for-hire operation to make her brother wealthy. But Marcus had resources Veronica lacked. Within days of his settlement offer being rejected, strange things started happening around town. Federal witnesses received job offers in distant cities. Key evidence went missing from local law enforcement. Someone tried to hack Agent Vance's computer systems. "They're escalating to federal obstruction," Agent Vance said grimly. "Marcus just graduated from accessory after the fact to active conspiracy." That's when Randy made a suggestion that changed everything. "What if we let them think they're winning while we document every crime in real time?" The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We'd appear to consider Marcus's settlement offer while federal agents recorded every bribery attempt, every witness tampering incident, every obstruction of justice. Within 2 weeks, we had enough evidence to charge Marcus with 14 additional federal crimes. But our victory celebration was premature, because Veronica had one more card to play, and it would nearly destroy everything we'd built. The call came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday that changed everything. "Garrett, it's Agent Vance. Agent Todd. We have a problem. Veronica Blackwell was found dead in her cell an hour ago." I sat up in bed, instantly awake. The taste of adrenaline filled my mouth like copper pennies. "Dead? How?" "Apparent suicide. Bedsheet noose. Standard method for federal detention facilities. But the timing is suspicious." Suspicious was an understatement. Veronica's death came exactly 12 hours before she was scheduled to provide testimony against her brother Marcus and the rest of the criminal enterprise. Within hours, Marcus's lawyers were filing motions to dismiss all charges based on prosecutorial misconduct and destruction of evidence. Without Veronica's testimony, they argued, the federal case relied too heavily on circumstantial connections. "Your Honor," Marcus's lead attorney argued during an emergency hearing, "my client's sister was clearly disturbed and has now taken her own life rather than face the consequences of her actions. But her death cannot be used to convict innocent parties of crimes they didn't commit." Judge Rodriguez wasn't buying it. "Counselor, your client's sister died with $127 million in stolen assets and evidence of 7 murders. Her testimony was supportive evidence, not the foundation of our case." But Marcus had been busy during his sister's final days. The smell of expensive lawyers and dirty money hung over every development in the case. 3 key witnesses suddenly developed amnesia about their previous testimony. The county clerk who'd been cooperating with federal investigators claimed her previous statements were coerced. Even Dolores Martinez, our rock-solid tax records witness, started expressing doubts about her memory. "They're buying people off," Buck said during one of our increasingly grim strategy sessions. "Marcus has enough offshore money to make problems disappear." Agent Vance's investigation revealed the scope of Marcus's influence operation. $23 million had been distributed through shell companies to consulting contracts with virtually everyone connected to our case. Witnesses, their families, even their lawyers were receiving mysterious windfalls. "He's not just tampering with witnesses," Agent Vance explained. "He's systematically corrupting the entire judicial process." But Marcus made one critical error. He tried to buy off Randy Kowalski. The approach came through intermediaries: a job offer for Randy with a Houston security firm, a college scholarship for his daughter, a consulting fee of $500,000 for his expertise on organized crime. Randy played along, setting up meetings while wearing federal recording devices. "Mr. Kowalski," the intermediary said during a lunch meeting at our nicest restaurant, "Mr. Blackwell appreciates law enforcement professionals who understand the complexities of white-collar cases." "What kind of complexities?" Randy asked, his voice betraying nothing. "Sometimes witness memories become unreliable under federal pressure. Sometimes evidence interpretations change when viewed by experienced investigators." The recording was devastating. Clear evidence that Marcus was orchestrating systematic witness tampering and obstruction of justice. But Marcus's most audacious move was yet to come. He filed a federal lawsuit against me personally, claiming I was the mastermind behind an elaborate insurance fraud scheme. According to his complaint, I had murdered my own father, forged evidence of adverse possession fraud, and manipulated federal investigators to steal $200 million in energy rights. The real criminal in this case, Marcus's lawsuit claimed, is Garrett Hendricks, who orchestrated his father's death to claim mineral rights worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The accusation was so outrageous it almost seemed comedic. But Marcus had hired the kind of lawyers who specialize in turning truth inside out, and they'd crafted a narrative that was just plausible enough to create reasonable doubt. Their evidence was impressive in its creativity. Computer analyses suggesting Dad's photograph had been digitally altered. Financial records implying I'd known about the mineral rights before his death. Even psychiatric evaluations claiming I suffered from delusional disorders consistent with elaborate fraud planning. "They're trying to frame you for your father's murder," Sarah Martinez said during a victim services meeting that felt more like a war council. "It's despicable, but it's also brilliant legal strategy." The media coverage was devastating. National news outlets picked up the story of a shocking reversal in the Texas land fraud case. Headlines read, "Did son murder father for energy rights?" and "Federal investigation targets wrong suspect." For 2 weeks, I couldn't leave my house without cameras and microphones being shoved in my face. The smell of camera crews and aggressive reporters seemed to permeate every aspect of life. But Marcus had underestimated something crucial about small-town communities. The people of Millbrook Springs had known me for 52 years. They'd watched me grow up, seen me care for Dad during his final illness, witnessed my grief at his funeral. When Channel 7 News tried to interview people about my suspicious behavior, they got an earful. "You want to know about Garrett Hendricks?" old Mr. Simpson told the reporter. "He fixed my truck for free when I couldn't afford repairs. That boy wouldn't hurt a fly, much less his own father." The counter-narrative was building, but we needed more than character witnesses. We needed the smoking gun that would expose Marcus's entire operation, and we were about to get it from the last place anyone expected. The breakthrough came from Veronica herself, even from beyond the grave. Agent Vance called me early Friday morning, her voice crackling with excitement over the Federal Detention Center's phone line. "Garrett, you need to get down here immediately. We found something in Veronica's cell that changes everything." Hidden inside her prison mattress, federal investigators had discovered a thumb drive containing 15 years of meticulous records. Every murder, every bribe, every forged document, Veronica had documented it all like some kind of criminal accountant. She was keeping insurance, Agent Vance explained as we reviewed the files. Evidence against everyone involved, including her brother. If Marcus ever tried to abandon her, she could destroy him. The files contained audio recordings of Marcus ordering specific murders, bank records showing payments to corrupt county officials, even video footage of Veronica administering fatal insulin injections to her victims. But the most damning evidence was a recording made just 3 days before Veronica's death. Marcus visiting her in federal detention, speaking in coded language about permanent solutions to temporary problems. She knew her brother was planning to have her killed, Agent Vance said. This thumb drive was her dead man's switch. Judge Rodriguez scheduled an emergency hearing for Monday morning. The federal courthouse in Dallas was packed beyond capacity. Family members of murder victims, residents of Willowbrook Estates, media representatives from across the country. The smell of anxiety and anticipation filled the courtroom like incense at a funeral. Marcus sat at the defendant's table looking less confident than he had weeks earlier. His expensive lawyers whispered urgently among themselves while reviewing the new evidence. "Your Honor," federal prosecutor Maria Santos began, "the evidence we're about to present proves beyond any doubt that Marcus Blackwell orchestrated the systematic murder of 7 elderly Americans for financial gain." The first recording played throughout the courthouse like thunder. Marcus's voice, "David Campbell is being stubborn about the Oklahoma property. We need a permanent solution." Veronica's response, "Same method as the others? Whatever works, just make it look natural." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Harold Campbell, David's brother, was sitting in the front row with tears streaming down his face. The second recording was even more damning. "How long until the Texas situation resolves?" Marcus asked. "The old man won't sell. Garrett Hendricks is his son. He'll inherit if something happens." "Then something needs to happen. We've got $50 million in energy contracts riding on this." I felt like I was hearing my father's death sentence being planned in real time. The metallic taste of rage filled my mouth as I listened to these monsters discussing his murder like a business transaction. But the most devastating evidence was the video recording of Dad's final night. Veronica entering his house with a bottle of wine. Dad, always the gentleman, inviting her in for coffee. The two of them talking cordially about property values and development plans. Then Veronica slipping something into his coffee while he answered the phone. "This is premeditated murder," Prosecutor Santos announced. Video evidence of the defendant's sister administering a fatal dose of synthetic insulin to Harold Hendricks. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Several family members were crying openly. Judge Rodriguez called for order, but her own voice was shaking with emotion. Marcus's lead attorney stood to object. "Your Honor, these recordings were obtained illegally from a deceased person's property. They're inadmissible under federal evidence rules." "Counselor," Judge Rodriguez replied with ice in her voice, "your client's sister documented these crimes voluntarily. The Fourth Amendment doesn't protect criminal conspiracies from their own record-keeping." The final piece of evidence was a complete financial breakdown showing exactly how the murder-for-profit scheme worked. Marcus's energy company had generated $340 million in revenue from mineral rights obtained through systematic murder. 7 people died so Marcus Blackwell could become wealthy, Prosecutor Santos concluded. This is organized crime at its most callous and calculated. During a brief recess, I found myself standing next to Harold Campbell in the courthouse hallway. "Mr. Hendricks," he said, his elderly voice strong despite his tears. "David always said if anything happened to him, it wasn't an accident. Thank God someone finally proved he was right." We stood together in silence, 2 men united by grief and vindicated by truth. When court reconvened, Judge Rodriguez delivered a verdict that rang through the courthouse like a bell. "Marcus Blackwell, based on the evidence presented today, I'm ordering your immediate detention pending trial on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and 7 counts of first-degree murder. Bail is denied." Federal marshals moved toward Marcus as his lawyers frantically objected, but their arguments fell on deaf ears. "Furthermore," Judge Rodriguez continued, "I'm ordering the immediate seizure of all assets connected to Blackwell Energy Corporation as proceeds of criminal enterprise." The gavel's final bang echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, marking the end of 15 years of systematic murder and theft. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, he turned to look at me one last time. His eyes held the same cold calculation I'd seen in his sister, but now tempered with the bitter taste of defeat. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. But he was wrong. For 7 murdered families, for 196 innocent homeowners, and for anyone who believes justice eventually finds its way home, it was finally over. The truth had won. 2 years later, I stood in the exact spot where Dad used to camp, watching the sunset over what had become the Harold Hendricks Memorial Veterans Park. The smell of barbecue smoke drifted from the pavilion where 200 families were celebrating the second annual Truth and Justice Festival, a community tradition that had grown from our shared experience of surviving systematic murder and fraud. The transformation had been remarkable. Where Willowbrook Estates once stood, we'd built something better, a planned community where 89 of the original families had chosen to rebuild their lives on honestly purchased land. The mineral rights generated enough income to offer every lot at cost, with the surplus funding veteran services and elder fraud prevention programs across Texas. Sarah Martinez, who'd left Federal Victim Services to become our community director, approached with the annual report. Garrett, the Memorial Foundation has prevented 47 attempted elder fraud cases this year. The Legal Aid Clinic has helped 156 elderly Texans protect their property rights. The numbers were encouraging, but the real victory was in the details. Mrs. Patterson, the retired librarian, was teaching literacy classes in the community center built where Veronica's sales office once stood. Randy Kowalski had been elected sheriff on a platform of protecting vulnerable residents from financial predators. Most importantly, Harold Campbell had moved to Millbrook Springs to help run the Memorial Foundation. At 81, he'd found purpose in ensuring no other families endured what his brother David had suffered. Buck Morrison's law practice had expanded into a statewide elder protection organization. His success rate in fighting adverse possession fraud was now 100%, largely because the Blackwell case had created legal precedents that made similar schemes almost impossible to execute. The beauty of federal asset forfeiture, Buck explained to visiting law students, is that it turns the criminal's money into victims' justice. Every dollar they stole becomes a dollar that prevents future crimes. Agent Vance had been promoted to head the FBI's Elder Fraud Task Force, which had grown from our investigation into a national program. The task force had prevented an estimated $2.1 billion in planned fraud schemes across 23 states. Pattern recognition is everything, she told a conference of law enforcement officials. Once you understand how these criminal enterprises operate, you can spot them forming before they claim victims. The educational impact extended far beyond law enforcement. Medical schools now taught the Hendricks case as an example of how synthetic insulin can be used for murder. County clerks across Texas received mandatory training on recognizing attempts to manipulate tax records. But perhaps the most meaningful change was personal. I'd married Sarah 2 months after the federal trials concluded, and we'd adopted Emma and Marcus, siblings who'd lost their elderly grandfather to a fraud scheme in Louisiana. The kids were now 12 and 14, playing the same games I'd played on this land 40 years earlier. "Dad," Emma called from the memorial playground, "tell us again about Grandpa Harold and why we named the park after him." I walked over to where the kids were sitting under the oak tree where I'd scattered Dad's ashes. The evening light filtered through leaves that had witnessed 3 generations of Hendricks family history. "Your Grandpa Harold was a man who believed in doing the right thing, even when it was difficult," I began. "He served his country in Vietnam, worked hard his whole life, and taught me that land isn't something you own, it's something you protect for the people who come after you." Marcus, our 14-year-old, was studying the memorial wall where Dad's name was engraved alongside the other 6 murder victims. "But why did those bad people want to hurt elderly folks like Grandpa?" "Because they thought elderly people were easy targets who wouldn't fight back," Sarah answered gently. "They didn't understand that families like ours never give up when someone we love is threatened." The annual festival was winding down, but families lingered around picnic tables sharing stories and making plans for the coming year. The sound of children's laughter filled spaces where criminal conspiracies had once been planned. Dr. Williams, our community physician, approached with news that made the evening even more special. "Garrett, I wanted you to know, the Harold Hendricks Medical Scholarship just sent its 50th student to medical school. We're graduating doctors who specialize in recognizing elder abuse and protecting vulnerable patients." The festival tradition had started small but now attracted visitors from across the country, families who'd survived similar fraud schemes, law students studying white-collar crime, elderly Americans learning to protect themselves from financial predators. As darkness settled over the memorial park, I found myself standing next to Dad's memorial stone. Sarah and the kids were helping clean up the pavilion, their voices mixing with those of neighbors and friends who'd become family through shared struggle and triumph. "Dad," I said quietly, "we did it. Not just justice for us, but protection for everyone who comes after. The land is safe, the community is strong, and the truth won out." The wind through the oak trees sounded like approval. If you're watching this and you've got your own HOA nightmare story, share it in the comments below. These predators count on silence, but together we can protect each other. Subscribe and hit that notification bell for more David versus Goliath justice stories. Because sometimes, when truth meets courage and good people stand together, the little guy actually wins. Next week, I'll tell you about the city that condemned a man's house for a Walmart parking lot and how he waited 3 years, then bought the Walmart.